Center from all the way from Poland. Now we move on to our next news. 11 jailed in Russian dissidents have written to world leaders appealing for a mass release of Russian political prisoners and Ukrainian civilians held by Russia as part of a peace deal between Moscow and Kyiv. In the letter, the dissidents said that alongside prisoners of war, thousands of Ukrainian civilian quote-unquote hostages were being held by Russia. Among the signatories was Alexei Gorinov, who in 2022 became the first person to go to prison under laws passed shortly after the Ukraine invasion that made it a crime to spread false information about the armed forces. The youngest to sign was Daria Kozyriva, who was sentenced in April to 2 years and 8 months in prison for using graffiti and 19th century poetry to protest against the war in Ukraine. Their statement has been backed by a message from Russian Nobel Prize winner Dmitry Muratov. Muratov's message and the letter has urged leaders in Russia, Ukraine, and the European Union, as well as the United States and elsewhere, to act. Now we move on to our next news. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen kicked off Denmark's EU presidency today, arriving in the city of Aarhus. The day began with a meeting between EU commissioners and the Danish government at Aarhus University and will culminate in formal ceremony at the City Hall, followed by a reception hosted by King Frederick and Queen Mary. During his 6-month presidency of the EU Council, Denmark says it will prioritize finalizing the EU's 2040 climate targets and advancing Ukraine's bid for EU membership. Prime Minister Frederiksen welcomed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to the opening ceremony, vowing that the Danish presidency would do everything it can to support Ukraine's path to joining the European Union. Frederiksen said Ukraine's future lies firmly with the EU, calling it a shared interest for both Denmark and Europe. The agenda also includes discussions on expanding military support for Ukraine, boosting cooperation in defense industry, and imposing new sanctions on Russia. Now we are being joined by guest Sander van Hoorn. He's former EU correspondent, joining us live from Brussels. Welcome to NewsX World, Sander. Good to see you. How realistic is Denmark's goal of sealing the EU-wide 2040 climate target deal within a 6-month presidency, and what compromises will be needed for this to take place?
Well, realism dictates that, of course, you cannot do everything in half a year, in 6 months, but it's about setting the agenda, and it's about setting the agenda after, for example, the presidency of Hungary, which did not do very much in this respect, also when it comes to supporting Ukraine. So it's a change of tone that is important. It's sending a message, and it's starting basically, or restarting, the green agenda. The difficulty Denmark is facing, of course, is the economic problems in Europe and the rising realization that all those measures cost money, and that industries, for example, that you try to limit their greenhouse gas emissions, that they might just as well go to Asia, for example. So that realism is also a constraining factor on the Danish presidency.
And now looking back at EU, Ukraine is now pushing for membership bid what concrete steps can Copenhagen push through the Council to keep momentum while the war still rages, and how might enlargement, maybe fatigue among some member states in EU, slow this process?
Well, that's a very layered question. First of all, EU is most times about language. So saying at the beginning of the presidency that one of your goals is to push forward the membership bid of Ukraine is sending an important message, a message Ukraine needs after basically receiving a cold shoulder at the NATO summit last week in the Netherlands. There, President Zelensky played like a very minor role. So giving him front stage right now is sending a message. The actual membership, of course, is another question. It will take time. It takes a long time. It will require reforms on the side of the Ukrainians in terms of transparency, in fighting corruption, in modernizing their economy, and of course, stopping the war. So that will be a lengthy process. And then your third part of the question was the sentiment in Europe against another country joining EU. One of the fundamental problems of the EU is that it was built around states working together, and that group of states has become very big. It's a problem already that for some decisions you need unanimity among those nations, and that is hard to achieve as it is, let alone if a very big country joins. So that will require reforms within the EU, and that is something that is not even on the Danish agenda at this time.
Thank you very much,